Hi there, my name is Chadwick, and this is going to be my workflow, my template for how I do screen replacements or screen inserts on the Fusion page of DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to cover things like Mocha Pro, alpha gain for controlling the lighting and the grain, why I don't actually composite in the tracking tool using the Variblur, and how we deal with rotoscoping. Lots and lots in this tutorial. So even if you think you're a screen replacement pro, I think there's something you might take away from this. The chapters are marked. The footage is up on Cutting Club if you want to follow along. Let's get started. So in the Fusion page, the clip I've got to play with today has a big, strong reflection on it. We've got an occlusion down there in the corner, and it's S-Log3, S-Gamut3 Cine. So we don't actually want to composite with this footage the way it is right now. So I'm going to start with two color space transforms. One to get us into linear for compositing, and one for Rec 709 for things like tracking or Magic Mask. Although I'm not covering Magic Mask today, we're going to do Stabilize Roto instead. We're going to take it up a notch. Shift Space, CST, that gives us our color space transform to get us into linear. Load that into the flow. You'll see I'm staying in the same S-Gamut3 Cine color primaries, so I'm not introducing any new negative pixels. And then I'm going to linear. So I'm just going S-Log3 to linear, no tone mapping. And so that gives us into linear. It looks dark. That's normal. If you're new to this, in the top right, we have a viewing LUT. I will turn that on, come down to color space transform, edit, and we're going from S-Gamut3 Cine linear to viewing. This is just for viewing, 709, 709 with tone mapping. Now, we also need a 709 image of this for tracking and for tracking for this tutorial. A Magic Mask would be another good instance. Any AI tool needs to be in 709. So to get a 709 version of this, Command-C on that node, click over here, Command-V, and take a branch. Great thing about nodes, we can branch off. On this one over here, rather than the output being S-Gamut3 Cine, I'll just change this one to Rec 709. Rec 709, turn on the tone mapping, and from here on out, I'm going to open up Mocha Pro, my favorite plugin. And I think I've got a discount code. NAB surely will have a discount code for this if you want to try it out. It's probably even a trial. It's my daily, well, not my daily, it's my weekly driver on how I track things. The first time you play through the clip in Mocha, it's going to be a little bit slow because it's caching those frames. This is like a 4.5K raw image that it's trying to play back. There it goes, it's a little faster now. First thing I look for when I'm going to track a screen. By the way, this is how you actually shoot a screen if you're in production. You turn the screen off and you remove all the tracking markers, because otherwise you got to paint those out if you want something that's really production ready. But what I really want to get across here before I even begin to track the screen is I want to track occlusions, things that are closer to the frame first. And this lower left is a problematic thing because it covers up this important corner. It was on purpose. So the way I'm going to track this first is just find a frame, zoom in on it. I'm going to use my middle mouse to zoom in on my Wacom over here and create a shape to get some tracking data. So I can use this for a rotoscope and for a garbage mat on this corner screen. I'll grab up at the top toolbar, the X-Spline tool, and I will just click a shape over any area that's coplanar. Something that I didn't quite understand when I first started using planar trackers. I thought they had these shapes here all had to be a perfect rectangle. They don't. They just need to be on the same coplanar surface. The rest of the tools here are set as I want them. I don't need perspective for this. I'm going to use it for roto and for garbage mat. So I can hit this button, this gear cog, to start the track on it. Looks like that is done, and it has stuck well enough for our needs today. So to expand this, to actually cover up the corner after it's been tracked, you can change the shape of it. Just select all the points of the lasso, hold E for extend. And if I drag up, you'll see those points now go out a little bit further than they did before. And they completely cover all of the intersection of that corner. That's all I'm really needing. If I hit 1, you'll see that's the area that it's going to do the occlusion for. Next up, I'm going to turn off the cog so it doesn't accidentally process and track again. I'll just call this one garbage. Next up, I'm going to hit Shift 8 to get my asterisk to fit to frame, and I'm going to get a good reference frame, probably most perpendicular to camera, to start tracking the bezels of the computer screen. That's what I'm interested in. I don't want to track the middle here at all because the light changes so much that that's actually not coplanar data. That is a different surface. It's reflecting. So reflections don't work. Shadows don't work when you're tracking screens. you got to knock those out. And so to do this, I'm going to grab this rectangle X-spline tool, just click and drag to make a selection around it. This is a difference between the tool that's inside of here and the tool that's inside of the Fusion page. Is you can go slightly outside of the frame, and that's what makes part of what makes this tool work a little bit better, or be just a little bit more functional than what's built in. But again, this is a purpose-built tracking tool. It should be better. So if I hit Option 1 right now and you move across, two things aren't happening. One, I have nothing knocked out in the middle, and this occlusion garbage mat is also not knocking stuff out like I would like it to. The reason why is I need the garbage mat to live above the tracking layer. So I just click on word garbage and move this up above. Actually, it doesn't let me go above. I'll drag layer 2 below. There we go. Below is behind, I guess is what I would say. So now you can see that it is knocking out that corner. The only thing is I don't have the center of this knocked out yet, and that's because I need to add another layer to layer 2. And so the rectangle X-spline tool, if you hold down on it, you'll see there's a plus version of it. This allows me to add like its own separate layer that could do occlusions within the same layer. So by doing this, if I drag a layer in here, now I've got like a frame. This is kind of what you want for most screen replacements, is you want to track those edges, those bezels. And so I will just back here, just make this smaller so that we're not getting, I don't want to get a lot of that light play interaction in my track data, because that will throw things and make it slip. Something like that should work decent. And then maybe give this a name. We'll call this one screen. And then we need to turn on our perspective down here under the track tab, because we actually need perspective for any time you do a screen, because all these four corners are going to move independently. And the last thing I'll do is turn on the surface tool. That's this button here, this blue tool. This actually shows us a representation of how the track is actually moving over time. We can line this up with our frame here. We can always move this with tracking offsets in Fusion later on, but this is going to give us indication if the track is actually sticking or if it's sliding. If you turn on grid, you can see things a little bit better. I will hit track, and we'll see how well this does. All right, not too bad. If I play through there, it does not appear to be sliding too much thanks to the occlusion that we had done. I might at this point consider going to set these corners out a little bit further. To do that, I will turn off the overlay. So option 1, disabling that sort of fill. I'll turn off this button here, which is going to get rid of those splines in my view, so that I'm just seeing the corners of the surface tool. And I will just click and drag these out a little bit closer to the edge. In fact, turn on this magnifying glass zoom button. Gives you like a temporary zoomed in view of that corner up here in the upper left of the screen, which can be really handy. And if you hold Command Option when you're dragging this, it turns it into, they call it a lazy viewer. It takes more effort to go a smaller distance. So you can really kind of position things where you think those should live. And really, because I can't really see too much into the screen at all right now, I'm just trying to make the lines parallel, so that the edges of the bezels are feeling pretty parallel across the board. And these can be adjusted to your heart's content inside of DaVinci Resolve using offsets afterwards. This is just our starting point. If you needed to adjust it, you have Adjust Track to do that, but we're going to call this good for now so we can keep things moving. I'm going to click Export Track. Make sure you choose Fusion Blackmagic, Fusion Tracking Data, copy to clipboard, save, close, and back over here in Fusion, Command V to paste. This tracking tool right here has everything we need to do this screen replacement. I also am interested in the tracking data for this occlusion down here for a stabilized rotoscope, but this will get us started. So I'm going to hit Function F2 to rename this one screen, and I'm going to quickly hop back to Mocha to get the tracking data for this screen. Launch Mocha UI. And to get this tracking data from this guy down here for this garbage mat, remember we've got some great tracking data there. What I want to do is actually what is called the align surface technique, which basically says, you can see we've got a surface here and it's pinned to these corners. Well, when you bring this into Fusion, it just makes a normal point tracker from it, but we can stabilize and match move from that. And what I want to do is basically the equivalent of what the planar tracker in Fusion is called Create Planar Transform. If you've ever clicked that button, it exports like a planar transform file. This is essentially the same thing. When I hit this button that's up here at the top, it's called Align Surface Tool. It expands each of those corners to fit the frame on that reference frame, which I have set to 62 right here, and everything else moves around it. But all that tracking data will come along with it. That's what I'm interested in for my garbage mat for my roto down here. So to do that, I'll just say Export Track, copy to clipboard before, save, close, and click, paste. And I don't need the loader that comes along with that. And I will just rename this one to Roto. That's one of the last steps. We'll deal with that corner down there as a separate patch. Now that we're done with Mocha Pro, we're actually also done with this Rec 709 color space tool. I can delete those. You can just have these tools that have all the data that's needed, and this could be passed along in a collaborative project when someone does not have Mocha Pro. That's one of the nice things about this workflow. To get something in the screen to get started, you're going to plug stuff into the tracker tool here, this screen tool. You're going to take the background footage, which is just that linear footage. Then we need something to go into the green foreground. I'm going to grab from the media pool just the checkerboard image. You just want to make sure that the aspect ratios match the actual footage that was shot. So if it's a widescreen monitor, this 16:9 graphic wouldn't work, but they all do. So I'll just plug this into the foreground element. And you don't see anything because when these come in, they're not set to any operation other than these keyframes for the track data. You need to come up to the inspector, operation, change this to corner positioning, and now we have a match move. We've got a screen comp. It doesn't have light reflections yet. It doesn't have any integration with the blur. So let's move on to that next. Before we actually use the Variblur, I want to suggest that you never actually composite in the tracking tool itself. And the reason why is I have no alpha channel to get out of this to do more advanced effects that we're going to do in this tutorial. So what I mean by that is we're going to merge this separately so that the output of this, we have an alpha channel available. If I hit A for alpha, it doesn't exist because we already done the comp. So in the tracking tool itself, if we change this to foreground only, we still have the alpha channel available and we can still merge this to our heart's content. So I'll do that. I'm going to grab a merge tool. The background will be our footage. The foreground will be the screen comp. And that's the same thing, except now I have, if I look at this, I have an alpha channel I can work with. In fact, I'm going to explicitly denote in my comp that I'm going to work with the alpha channel separately by grabbing a bitmap tool. Shift space, bitmap tool. So with this plugged into here, I've got this set aside for this mask to do some pre-multiplication to cut things out later on. The first thing I want to do is think about integrating this with depth of field blur. Motion blur is actually a really good idea. We could go ahead and turn that on before I forget. So on the tracking tool, because this is actually making things move, I would go to the settings tab, hit use motion blur. And then to get better screen previews, I might down here in the right, come and click to turn motion blur off while I'm working, but it'll still render when I go out to the edit page. Just a little trick about performance there. The other thing would be at this point to think about adding blur to this comp. So we've just comped everything together. Blur works best once you've already stuck everything together. Now I used to do an edge mask blur and I found that Variblur is a little bit more realistic, better looking blur. So that's what I've been using over the last year. Variblur, just shift space. It's a tool that has a special input. This green foreground input basically takes like a depth map. Or you could generate your own depth map with a background tool, which is what I'm going to do. So take our comped version into the Variblur. I'll just exaggerate this by turning up the blur size a little bit. You even have like a defocused version of it. But to actually control what sections of this are blurred and which are not blurred, what you do is create a little fake gradient depth map. I'm grabbing a background tool to do this. It's just solid as it comes. But if you grab your background tool and change it to something like gradient, what's white is going to be affected, what's black is not affected. And there's even a better version of the, not just a linear gradient, but you could use what's called reflect in here. And if you use reflect and grab the left side, you'll see there's like a sliver in the middle, which is kind of like a depth of field when you could think of it like a tilt shift blur. Like this area could be in focus because this would not get as affected by Variblur, and then the white would be more affected. If you wanted it even less affected, you could come to like the color over here, make that less white, make it more gray, all kinds of control. And you can keyframe this as well to match with the original plate. But the way it works is super, super dead simple. You just take the output of this into the green input, and you'll see how it's affecting the amount of blur differently here on the edges where it's more grayish white than it is like dead center where, you know, it's more black in this Variblur. So you can adjust this as needed, and it's just a smoother blur than using a blur and an edge mask and a separate defocus. This is the way I prefer to do this nowadays. Maybe we also want to consider extending these edges out a little bit more from our original placement, you know? So the way you can do that is on the tracking tool itself. Just click on there. Under trackers, each one of these has, tracker 1, 2, 3, 4, has an X offset and a Y offset, which you could just manipulate and move those here. You'll see you get like a dashed red line. But a nicer on-screen way of manipulating these is up in the upper left of the viewer, you get this blue tool. That's your offset tool. When you make it blue, it gives you the opportunity to select that point and reposition it exactly where you want. So maybe you want it a little bit closer to the bezel. Maybe they said, hey, our monitor can go further to the edge. You can just drag these out so that they go to the edge. And what's really cool is when you're blurring the whole comp together, those edges just kind of look believable. You know, you never really have super hard edges in real life if they're photographed through a lens. And that's why we're using the Variblur. We will cut this out. Don't worry, we're going to make a patch out of this, but this is going to get us a really nice start. The next thing we need to think about is lighting and grain. So I did the blur before this so that the grain and the lighting from the reflections come together and they go after. It's a change to how I used to do this. So to get the original light added back on, we're going to do that with just a merge tool, actually. Merge tool has like a special mode in it called alpha gain. And with alpha gain turned down to 0, it's an add mode. And so the way it'll work is I will take the background will be our main comp that we have so far, the results of the Variblur. Try to make this as organized as I can. The foreground of the merge is actually the original footage here. So I'll take this and go that into the green foreground of it. You just take alpha gain, slide that all the way down to 0. And now I've just added all those pixels back together so you can see we're getting the grain, the lighting reflection changes over time. The only thing is we're adding it to everything. So you look at the original footage, it's getting added to this light down here will get brighter. So we just need to use a mask to then sort of patch and cut this out. That's the reason we use the foreground only out of the tracking tool that gave us this mask. So how do we use that mask with this tool right here after we've added everything back together? I'll use a matte control tool to do that because it has some extra softening tools built right in. So after merge 2, I'm going to grab a matte control tool from up on the toolbar, and I will feed that into the green foreground of matte control, the mask. I'm going to hold option to make a little pipe connector over there, try to stay a little bit organized as we go. And when I load this into the flow, nothing happens because I have nothing set up in the tool yet. What you want to do is copy the alpha in. So the combine operation is already set to copy, but what are we copying? The alpha, combine alpha. And you'll see you get this weird checkered overlay. It's because it's not been multiplied by the alpha yet. It hasn't been knocked out. So you just hit post multiply image. And now we've got like a patch. This could then just be merged back over the original, but we haven't dealt with the corner that's going to need some rotoscoping. But if, let's say you didn't have rotoscoping, at this point you could just come down here, grab a good old merge tool, background, foreground, call that good. But see, we're going to have an issue down here we're going to have to deal with. That's why we got that second bit of tracking data. But if at this point you're done and you're checked out, you don't want to know how to do rotoscoping, you're dismissed. I would say you probably want to think about getting this out of linear before you leave this page. So you take this color space transform, Command C, Command V, and right before your media out, your last step is going to be to take this one, hit the swap button to put it back into log so that when you go to color grade it, everything just matches. Let's take care of the rotoscoping using a stabilized rotoscoping method and using Atop to then merge together two pre-multiplied patches. So the focus of this section is to give you skills to deal with things like a finger, like a thumb over a phone. Maybe it needs color extensions and maybe it doesn't, like this, but how can we get a nice clean roto of the corner here so it looks like this appears back over the top? Way I do it is I'll take my original footage and feed that into my roto node here. Let's just drag that into the roto node. I'm going to hold Option to make a little bracket. And hopefully I'll make sure you get a good screen grab of everything before I end today. In the roto node itself, we did perspective positioning match moves. Well, there's another function that's in the operation here that's the opposite of match moving for 4 points. And that's called perspective positioning. Perspective positioning is basically a stabilize. So we'll choose that. Perspective positioning. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to rotoscope something without it moving around all over on screen. And so this is going to allow me to do that. The thing is I actually need to take a foreground and a background into here. The background sets the resolution. The foreground is the result of it. I'm going to change the merge mode here to foreground only. And what this is doing is it's giving me a stabilized version of the whole plate. Now, it's a stabilized version of the area that I tracked. So you're thinking, well, that's not stabilized at all. It's doing some weird turny thing. Well, remember on this node, I just got tracking data for this corner down here, and this has completely locked this off. It's acting like a still image. So if I just cut this shape out and then I reapply the motion, it'll give me a great result without me having to do hardly any manual keyframes. And that's the key to good rotoscoping. It's not going every single frame and drawing a mask. It's getting a good stabilized version of it, drawing the mask and making as minimal keyframes as possible so it's super stable. So let's do that. I'm going to grab a B-spline tool from the toolbar to start working on my mask while looking at the stabilized roto, which is set perspective positioning foreground only. And we'll just start here on this frame. The first frame you start clicking, it sets a keyframe automatically for you. I'll just click points around the edge, and I really only need it to be accurate when the LCD part of the screen is visible. So this part down here doesn't matter quite as much. I almost always like to use a double poly, which basically allows me to add softness to this that is controllable in either direction completely independently. So I do that. That's the DD, double polyline. I select all the points. I hold O. That extends it out. And I just want a tiny bit of feather there, you know. And maybe the inside now is not far enough inside, so we'll hit Tab to get the selection of the inside. It looked like it took 3 times. Then I hold O again, and I bring that inside in just a little bit more. And so you'll see this is giving me a nice little feather where it's not going inside and outside like Gaussian blur, which is what the soft edge does. This is more linear. That's what I was trying to say. But now what I'll do is I'm looking at the roto node. I have the B-spline selected. I'm going to move to the opposite end of the shot, so back to frame 0, and see if this needs any movement. It looks like it probably could be shifted a little bit. Always think of moving edges with rotoscoping, so I selected just these points with a lasso. And I'll use like the arrow keys to move this into position. And we'll just see, does it hold over time? And it looks like it does a pretty decent job in my opinion. So this is giving us a really nice stable line as this comes into play. And the way we'll actually use this today is to reapply the motion with another version of this tracker tool set to corner positioning. Now at this point, you might want to do like edge extension or some color treatment if there's contamination in the foreground element. That happens all the time with thumbs. Even thumbs on like a black phone, you might have black on the thumb that you actually don't want. You need to extend the actual color of the thumb out. That's why I'm using this as sort of my template setup. To apply this mask in, what I'll do is I'm going to grab a brightness contrast node. Really lightweight, fast node to do this. If you feed the mask into the brightness contrast, go to settings, multiply by mask. You'll see that actually cuts the patch out. And then I'm going to reapply the motion afterwards with a copy of this tracking tool, Command C, Command V, doing the same technique where we sort of double apply it to the background and the foreground. But on this one, if we need it to move, we change this to Inspector, Corner Positioning. And so now we've got that moving along, and it could be basically merged back on top of our original cutout in a top mode. However, there's one thing that is causing extra softness to this that we don't necessarily need. So all I really needed to do in this instance was to match move the mask, not the actual colored pixels. So like I did before, I'm going to show my work and just extract the mask here so that it's not getting a double filter hit from two different stabilization or two different tracking modes here. So just like before, I'll take a bitmap tool out of here. And I'm just interested in the animation of this shape right here. That was the whole purpose of that setup. And I will multiply that with the original RGB pixels. To do that, let's just do like we did before with the brightness contrast. One of those, Command C, Command V. Again, the settings tab was set to multiply by mask. I'll take the original footage, right, which is this. That's a way to take a copy, by the way, using just brightness contrast. I'll take the mask, plug it in there, and now I've got a set of pixels here that has not been double filtered. It's just what's been filtered is the actual mask itself. Now I've got a patch here. Okay, that's patch 1. I've got a patch here. I want to combine these two before I merge them back over the original plate. And I'm going to do that with a merge operator called Atop. It basically takes in consideration of the background to cut out the foreground. And so to do that, I'll grab a merged node, take the background is the screen. What goes on top is this patch right here. This goes into merge, load that up. This is what it looks like in normal, what we call over mode, merge over. But what I want is I'm really just interested in this tiny corner here. So what you do is you change merge mode here to operator Atop. And now it's only used in the sections when they actually intersect. You see there? So this is perfect. All I need to do is actually use this as my main patch, my main insert, instead of what I had done before. So I've got that roto accounted for. I will bring this down here, take this, plug this into the foreground. I'm going to hit Command F to fit to viewer. Something that I want to point out that is a good reason for using the matte control node for this original cutout is you see these edges here. There's a little bit of a giveaway that they don't match all that great. So in matte control, we've got a blur slider. I'll just bring that blur slider up a little bit until we get those to blend a little bit nicer. You might even use the contract expand, which is like a road dilate, to bring that in. And maybe even bring the gamma down. You can adjust the edge is basically what I'm getting at with that. Maybe it needed more blur. Maybe something along those lines. Maybe gamma down even a little bit more till we get a nice looking blend on those two different elements. And the last piece of the puzzle is, what if you don't want to actually screen composite just a checkerboard? How are you going to color manage any other screen graphic? Well, I've got one in the files for you to play with. You can just screen grab any wallpaper yourself. That's what this is. Most of the time when you're given a graphic element from a graphic artist, it's going to be sRGB. So you can't necessarily just swap this out because the math isn't going to quite work out exactly right. You see, this doesn't look good at all. What you want to do is you want to color space transform any sRGB graphics so they're working in the same space as the rest of the comp, meaning that they're in linear and the same color primaries. So I'm going to do that by taking this color space transform, copying it, selecting this new insert, Command V to paste it, and I need to change the inputs here to sRGB and sRGB. The outputs will stay the same, but the inputs need to help us get that mapping correct. So let's change this here, sRGB. I always have a hard time grabbing that one, sRGB. And just by changing that, now it looks pretty believable that that's the actual screen insert. If you want to color grade this to your heart's content, go to the color page with it, because we're already back in log. See, this is the state of our log image. We did this all on the raw. This is why you do effects before color, is basically you can bake everything in. The look that I like as a base for a lot of stuff is actually using what's called JP2499, this DRT that uses DaVinci wide gamut to put it in 709. It's just a good starting point, and you put this all at the very end of your node tree. To get this into DaVinci wide gamut, because I was working S-Gamut 3, S-Log 3, S-Gamut 3 Cine, S-Log 3, I have a node here that's saying I'm going into DaVinci wide gamut like this, and I'm just using use timeline because my color space settings are setting to use S-Gamut 3, Cine, S-Log 3 to work native up until that point. My name is Chadwick. I super appreciate you if you stuck around this long. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of everything in this comp, hopefully enough time for you to screen capture it. Consider signing up for Cutting Club if you like VFX tutorials. That's most of the shots I have on there right now. But we're basically, the way the flow works is we've got our media in one, which is the log clip. We're going into linear. I've got, this is our first main screen comp, which is set to corner positioning, foreground only. So I'm able to grab a mask out of it. And the first important deal is I'm sticking these back together outside of the tracking tool. Then I blur it so that the edges kind of blend with the original plate. You could set this, animate this over time using the background node set to gradient and reflect. Then I've got a merge after, which is merging, or it's adding the light back on. Not just the light, but also the grain you'll see in there. And that's because this is set to alpha gain down to 0. It's a special thing you can do in linear light. And then I'm cutting it all out with this matte control. The mask is going to the green foreground, and I'm blurring it a little bit to take the edge off of those corners so that they integrate a little bit better. And then for the roto, that is set up with a stabilized roto technique, which is going to give me the opportunity to do any sort of color edge extension work on the roto scoped element. In this case, I didn't need to. So I reintroduced the motion. I took just the mask out of it, and I multiplied that using brightness contrast settings set to multiply by mask. Finally, I've got two patches out of this, right? So I got the corner patch, I've got the screen patch, and I'm putting those both together using merge with the operator set to Atop, so I don't end up with a double pre-multiply in my final merge where I stick everything back together. And then, of course, the final color space transform is going to swap what we did at the top so that it's S-Gamut 3 Cine, S-Log 3. I hope you had fun. I'll see you next time.